Hey listeners, this is Alex, your host of EOA, Entrepreneurs of Asia. After more than a decade of venture building, bootstrapping, scaling, and now investing in Southeast Asia, I sit down with founders, investors, and entrepreneurs who can share their hard-earned lessons and stories for the benefit of the Asia ecosystem and beyond. Today I sit down with my good friend Walter Guevera. Due to internet latency, we had some trouble getting our usual homely vibe of lively conversation. However, despite the technical issues, we still packed the episode with topics that are beneficial, especially if you care about the energy markets of Latam and Southeast Asia, and why it's hard to drive innovation in the space. Deep tech presents very hard topics for people to approach, but it deserves more airtime. Secondly, we unpack the fintech ecosystem of Southeast Asia from the markets of Vietnam, Philippines, and Malaysia, and how innovation, startups, and investment will unfold in the coming years. Lastly, we talk about Walter's current endeavor in tackling the mental wellness space for minorities and how mental health affects more of our lives than we realize. Also, stick around to hear the final section on some of the big differences between LATAM and Southeast Asia from Walter's first-hand experience. If you're ready to learn, dive in and listen. Walter Guevera, my half Taiwanese, half Peruvian brother from another mother. How are you doing?
Hey, Alex. Good to have you here. How's everything over there?
Everything's good in KL. It's nighttime. I think it's daytime for you, right?
Yeah, it's daytime. It's 8 a.m., but happy to have you.
Where are you currently?
I'm in Fort Worth.
In Fort Worth in Texas. Okay.
Fort Worth, yeah.
Yeah, Fort Worth. Cool. So today we have with us Walter, co-founder and CEO of TerapyGo, an online therapy platform provider which provides telebehavioral health via chat and video across LATAM in four countries. Did I get that right?
That's right.
And you were born and raised in Peru?
I was born in Washington State, and I grew up a significant part of my life in Costa Rica.
Oh, in Costa Rica. Oh, that's right. But which side of your family? You're from Peru originally, right? I mean, your family.
My father, yes.
Yeah, father. Okay. So, but you grew up in Costa Rica, which is probably very different than Peru, where you have one. Well, your company's headquartered in Peru, right?
So, given the times, we are a Delaware C Corp. We have I would say more than half of the team in Peru. That's right.
Okay. So you're kind of leveraging the remote work, but you're trying to probably get an investor base from the US.
That's correct.
So, I mean, we've talked about this before. Do you feel more Latin American or more Asian, I guess?
Right. So I guess in the social aspect, in the sense of always wanting to hang out and say have a barbecue and such, I guess I would be more Latin American. But on the other aspect of, let's say, introspection, family values, respecting the elders, being a foodie, I would consider myself more Asian.
Fair enough. We'll briefly discuss your background. You spent most of your early career in Peru, right? So where you worked at Next Group, which is one of the largest PE firms in Peru from 2009 to 2010. What was your favorite deal back then?
So my favorite deal was acquiring a school at K-12. The goal was to educate as many people as possible, given that education is deficient. So we acquired a small 3-school setup, and part of the deal was to roll it up. So nowadays it's closer to the target, which was at the time was 100 schools. I believe now it's around 60 schools. So it's a very big chain.
Then you also had some experience raising money for institutional investors.
Well, yeah. So back in the day, we made some slides and went around institutional investors. One of the big ones. I mean, at the time, it was a new name for me, but I'm sure you know Temasek.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So, but mostly. A big chunk of the money came from family offices. So in Latin America, kind of like Southeast Asia, a big chunk of the money is with the families.
Mm-hmm. And then you spent quite a few years doing energy, where 2009 to 2011, you worked for a company called Inkia Energy, which is a utilities provider for electricity. They do production, transmission, and distribution across 9 countries in Latin America. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. So that was my first really international experience. We focused on gas power, thermal, and hydro in terms of new development. And the footprint was all over the place: Dominican Republic, Guatemala, Chile, Peru, Colombia, and so forth. And we even tried to acquire assets in Poland and the US, but
Okay.
ultimately that didn't go through. And really the exciting part was focusing on the new technologies. So at the time, combined cycle gas was relatively new for the region, and highly efficient and considered a greener energy than existing heavy fuel and coal. And the other interesting project was a huge hydro, close to 600 megawatts, which is the second biggest in Peru. And we worked in a whole bunch of renewable energy projects. So if you go to the Dominican Republic and you see some wind turbines, it might have been part of our footprint.
Mm-hmm. Oh, nice. And then you continued your energy journey and worked for IC Power, which is a subsidiary of Israeli Corp, one of the largest, actually probably the largest holding company in Israel, founded by the government, right?
So at the time, it belonged to the richest Israeli Ofer group. So it's both companies are related. Inkia and IC Power, they're related companies.
Mm-hmm. Oh, they're related companies. I see.
Yeah. So wearing the IC Power hat, that's where we were out looking for projects overseas. So that's how we went to Poland, and we're considering buying some assets over there. So the interesting thing about Southeast Asia and Latin America is that new builds include gas power plants, hydro, and such. But if you go to Europe, most of their new builds are renewables. So, but this creates a problem because renewable energy does not have an dispatch order. You just have renewable energy. You just take the energy whenever it comes in.
Correct.
So as a result, all of the low efficiency thermal power has to be displaced, right? And that creates a little bit of chaos.
All the value is just lost then.
For those existing projects, yes. And on the other hand, the renewable energy is much more expensive. So even though you have new power plants in the system, ultimately everybody's paying 3x more money for their electricity.
I guess that explains a lot of why the energy sector moves a lot slower in terms of developing more innovative or even adopting more renewables. It's just it's very hard to let go of that all that investment. It's probably very similar to telecom too. You sink money into like 3G, now you're on 4G, and finally you're on 5G, and every year it's just changing faster. But I guess to the winner goes with spoils. Is that the same for energy?
Well, it's similar in the sense that you have a long lead time to set up all those power plants. And on top of that, oftentimes renewable energy has to be subsidized. So you subsidize renewable energy. If you look at some countries like Germany, you wouldn't believe how much solar projects they have, even though naturally solar power plants should be closer to the equator, given radiance.
Okay, let's before we dive too deep in energy, I'll finish the rest of your experience. So you decided you worked in Latam for quite a few years already, more than 5-6 years, and you wanted to experience Asia, or you did your MBA? Want to go? What was the story there?
That's right. I did my MBA at INSEAD, and it's a double campus program. So there's a campus in France and there's a campus in Singapore. So I recruited in Singapore, and that's how I ended up in Southeast Asia, which was a fantastic experience to live in Southeast Asia.
Did you always want to live in Southeast Asia, or just more by chance?
I wanted to be in Asia, and it was more by chance that I ended up in Southeast Asia, in countries such as Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, and Singapore.
And then, so after you did your MBA intern, you actually did an internship at Itaú BBA, the largest investment bank in Latin America. It seems like you could have continued a very prestigious finance career. How come you decided to not follow that path?
Right. So at the time, I felt that Southeast Asia was entering more of a digital age. It was the beginning of all the rise of all the unicorns in Southeast Asia. So,
Yeah.
so I felt that I had to be closer to this because it would be more future proof. If you look
Yeah.
at 2021, investment banks such as Goldman Sachs need to pay $110,000 just to hire first year analysts. And the reason is that most of the young people want to work in technology or other industries.
So, and then, but interestingly enough, you wanted to be in the region for closer to tech, but your first job was in Accenture Consulting in Singapore, right? So, what was the idea there? Were you just trying to stay in the region before you found your next gig, or you were looking at something specific for the Accenture?
I believe that Accenture was a good transition, given I had been working in financial roles within business development. In Accenture, I was focusing on M&A strategy, but also technology. So Accenture is a strong technology player in the region and in the world, and that gave me visibility on the market, and that's how I ended up in my next gig.
Who scouted you for your next gig, which was Lazada, some 2015, 2016? That was like the peak of Lazada, right? This was before the Alibaba merger you joined?
That's right. So at the time, Lazada was the biggest e-commerce player in Southeast Asia. And I had an acquaintance who was working there, having a blast. So I actually interviewed first with Alexi. He eventually became the country manager for Singapore.
And so you started working in Singapore, Lazada, and then how was your experience with Lazada? Good, bad, no regrets?
So I focused on the project, the presence in Philippines, given it was one of the more challenging markets and fastest growing. And I would say on one side, it's a very enriching experience to work in a scale up. Everything's really going very fast. Like selling an extra $1 million is just a matter of weeks. And but of course there are challenges. I don't know. Do you recall the Uber article about the toxic environment in the workplace? Yeah, so many of those challenges were present in Lazada. Yeah.
What's your favorite memory from Lazada?
I think generally speaking, the social aspect. So there's some sort of camaraderie, and you get to hang out a lot with your colleagues.
And I guess that's got to be contrasting because your next job was with one of the largest banks in Southeast Asia, CIMB, from 2017 to 2019, and you were doing fintech for this bank, right? You were able to launch the first digital bank in Vietnam for CIMB. You got a bank license in Philippines. You touched the Alipay and Touch and Go deal, and did a bunch of other internal projects, right? Must have been very different experience from Lazada.
Right. It was somewhat of a different experience going into a very large company with, at the time, roughly 30,000 workers, staff. But in a way, it was similar to past experiences to do business development, market expansion, market entries. So the Vietnam market entry was quite interesting because Vietnam, in my opinion, is one of the most dynamic markets in Southeast Asia. And on the other hand, Philippines had the great potential, given that existing banks were still working on legacy software. So having a digital bank in the Philippines ultimately was a very good play by CIMB.
Yeah. And then finally, I guess you worked there long enough in corporate. It might have been a little bit too slow paced compared to Lazada, because you eventually, in the past year or so, you founded a new company, TerapyGo, an online therapy provider. So I guess you had the itch, and you decided, enough of corporate, and you want to be a builder. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. I decided that I wanted to try my entrepreneur side, focus on something that matters. And I believe that mental health is something that really matters and hasn't been yet disrupted. So many different industries, logistics, commerce, have been tackled by different players. But I believe that mental health has a lot of space for growth.
So we're going to talk about probably the three topics today, which is power, fintech, and then TerapyGo, and maybe a little bit of Latam versus Southeast Asia. So for the first topic, though, we'll talk about your experience in power, because I personally am very interested in the space, so I'm hoping I can learn something. Back in 2011, when you were working there, what was the energy landscape like? What were the power players focusing on, and what were they thinking like the next big thing for the energy space?
So in Latam, there were two main focuses. One of them was to build combined cycle gas power plants, given that gas had been discovered. So you have a big turbine that burns gas, but all of the steam and all the heat is recycled in a steamer. So you have some steam power, and it's the most efficient energy. So if you look at Elon Musk doing his assumptions for power grids, he usually uses as a reference combined gas cycle. So it's the cleanest thermal. It's the cleanest, most efficient thermal energy from burning, right? And the other one is wind. So wind is all over the place. Most of the tropics have great wind. And wind is, given it's subsidized as well, it's a very profitable setup. And it's also great because it also offsets energy that is dirty.
And this was before or after the clean energy boom? Because there was this period of time for like a decade where everyone thought clean energy was going to be the big thing. Was this towards the tail end of this, or? At
the time, both wind and solar were not cost efficient, so they in a way that they would the market would embrace them. It requires subsidies. So with subsidies it works, but definitely you're creating market inefficiencies because it's a technology that cannot naturally compete with existing power.
Okay, so it's essentially a cost issue. It's just required more demand for the investment to follow and to scale it up. What was the tipping point then? Because it seems like solar is a clear thesis now. I mean, it's clearly the way forward in the short and medium term. Back then, it wasn't so clear, probably from, like you said, a cost perspective. What allowed it to become so accessible today?
So basically, I would say China, given the technology has reached cost efficiency and mass production. So
manufacturing.
So basically, manufacturing has become so efficient that solar can be embraced. I mean, even my brother is setting up rooftop solar to offset some of the energy he's consuming. But you also have to realize that solar follows the daylight, so you will still need to offset the ramp down of solar with a different technology, and usually this will be thermal. So generally speaking, you cannot have renewable energy without another technology that balances the power. So it's either setting up a battery, or having a thermal plant, or having a hydro with a hydro that has a large dam, so you can release water when it's nighttime.
And you're talking purely from a renewable standpoint in terms of complementing a technology like solar, or what do you mean by thermal?
Right. So, like I mentioned, gas power plants.
Oh, okay, so something non-renewable.
So they can be used to offset renewable. So whenever it's windy, then you turn off your power plants, your thermal power plants, or whenever it's sunny. But whenever it's not windy and it's dark, then you need to offset. This is usually with the water that is in the hydro plant, or with the thermal power plant, which ideally is a combined gas cycle.
And I guess we're at the current state, of how economies and nations are consuming energy and electricity. We're very probably far from having a very 24 even cycle of purely renewables, right? We're still for a long time going to need non-renewables to supplement renewables, I guess.
That's right. So if you look at some of the countries around the world, so you have France that have a large nuclear base,
Yeah.
and then on the other hand, you have a country like Denmark that has a huge wind power base.
Yeah.
So I believe that in order to tackle climate change, you need a global initiative so that
Yeah.
places like North Africa embrace solar, and places that have the water resources embrace hydro and so forth.
Yeah. So essentially, every country, it's just like international trade. You have to follow your competitive advantage and build renewable. That's probably the most efficient for what you have naturally.
That's right. But currently, you have a whole bunch of solar and wind projects in Europe, and
Yeah.
then you have thermal power in the Middle East and Latam, Southeast Asia. So it's a matter of optimizing this, and you can do this with the carbon credit market.
Carbon credit market. And I think Europe is probably the most mature in terms of a carbon credit market and actual derivatives being traded for this. How come it's not more widely spread?
The reason is that it needs to be a global initiative, and you have large fossil fuel producers. So you have the US, you
Yeah.
have Russia, and you also have China that burns a lot of fossil fuels. So it's not in their short term interest to embrace renewable energies and pay carbon credits for their emissions.
But then why? So why isn't solar even more widely accessible? What's the current impediment that we're seeing now? It's still not. It's not as easily. I mean, it's a lot easier than it was 10, 20 years ago, and it's quite accessible. But what's stopping the further adoption that we're seeing, like you said, in like North Africa or places in other parts of the world?
Well, on one hand, you have the concentration of you know most people are in the northern hemisphere. You have people living in Europe, China, Japan, and if you look at the southern hemisphere, it's usually less populated. So you you need to have the supply and the demand, and in order to have all these projects set up, you also need access to credit. So the large solar plants require a large investment. You have lots of private equity going into power because of this reason.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's the rules of engagement are different in every country. So that's why every country has a different outcome.
Yeah. So essentially, it has to be government driven. It has to be pooled together to help de-risk, also provide credit and liquidity for these kind of big infrastructure projects to kind of work out, I guess.
Yeah. Ideally, you need some sort of supranational oversight so that you optimize the planet's resources in such a way that you reduce our carbon footprint.
And it's probably why it's extremely hard to innovate in this space then, right? And it's probably why a lot of these big power companies like the IC Power that you worked for have to do M&A and looking at other opportunities to acquire instead of building it themselves.
Yeah, M&A is it speeds up market presence, given that a power plant might take 1 to 6 years to set up. It's very much similar to mining. If you want to set up a large mine, it's a very long process. And on the other hand, in order for you to replace the old technologies, you need to actually generate energy so that the old technologies does not need to run anymore. And usually that's not the case. So usually the old technology remains given the market grows. So if you look at Southeast Asia or Latam, you have fast growing economies that require much more power. So the old technology is usually not phased out immediately.
Yeah. Otherwise, you don't have power to run to continue growing the economy, right?
That's right.
So from an investor standpoint, when you were doing M&A, how often did you actually come across deep tech kind of deals or investment opportunities? For example, the more sci-fi stuff like fusion or geothermal, is that a common occurrence for you to come across in the deal flow? Or
So actually, no. it's not common. Um, Typically, the more advanced technologies would be common. So for emerging markets, um, combined gas cycle is a relatively advanced technology, and additionally, you have solar and wind power. That's what you would typically come about. Um, in a way, even though it's not very recent, I would say that nuclear is one of the advanced technologies, especially the more recent iterations that are able to reap more energy out of the uranium or other elements.
Yeah. And you're specifically talking about fission technology, which is splitting the atoms, which creates a huge amount of energy force, which we can harness, right? Is there a reason why you think nuclear is not widely adopted, or what are the reasons we shouldn't be afraid of nuclear?
So if there were, let's say, proper controls and also, let's say, if there were no terrorism, it would be more widely adopted for sure. But with the experience of Chernobyl and the experience of Fukushima, the more advanced economies are more reluctant to use nuclear fission technology. That's right.
Yeah.
And it's quite dangerous. Imagine if you had a large nuclear plant right next to Singapore or right next to Bangkok. It would definitely be a very, very big risk. But some countries are able to place their plants in such locations that they're well protected and isolated. So it's viable. But if you think of the next iteration of nuclear fusion, although you don't have the same radioactive risk, it's still a fusion plant, right? So it's a huge generator. You're having like a little piece of the sun here on Earth, and that although it doesn't have significant radiation, it's still quite dangerous. Yeah. Ultimately, I'm very bullish on fusion, but I also believe that another interesting technology might be solar energy, but from space.
From space. Oh, that's interesting. You don't hear that often talked about, right?
Right. So imagine having either large mirrors in space targeting the heat to a solar receptor here on Earth. That's one possibility. Also, you could think of solar panels providing energy for huge space stations or carriers. That would be quite exciting.
It almost seems we're definitely entering sci-fi territory. I feel like you would have to. Of course, we have to use fossil fuels to go boom to get to space, build giant starships, and maybe even a moon base for this to even be viable, right? And then you have to set up the infrastructure. And I guess what the main issue would be storage, because we would be powering space mirrors from the sun. How do you get the energy back to Earth?
Right. So actually, the space mirror, it would concentrate solar energy, and it would be able to focus that out back to Earth. So imagine it's nighttime, and you have this space mirror in the dark side, shooting light to some specific point on Earth. So the solar plant on Earth would be running at 24/7. That's one example, right? But the concentration of the heat, you can also have a convex mirror. So the concentration of that solar energy is higher than direct sun. So you're gonna have some special solar panels that are more efficient and generate more energy per square meter.
I mean, in terms of feasibility, is this space mirror more feasible than the idea of fusion, or which one's more probabilistic to happen in our lifetime?
I'm bullish on both, but given the recent push for space travel, I believe those technologies will become cheaper. So it might become cheaper to set up this type of technology. The issue is to have this large mirrors in space. It could potentially be a weapon, Just imagine you
Oh,
just
true. James Bond stuff.
Yeah, James Bond stuff. That's right. Like Icarus.
Yeah. You could destroy a whole city with a solar beam, I guess, technically, right?
Yeah, technically, yeah.
And so does that mean you're betting most of your portfolio on SpaceX, or where are you putting your money today?
Right. I'm still focusing on current technologies,
Yeah.
So
Okay.
so current technologies, all the large tech here on Earth. I believe that space requires lots of government contracts for now.
Yeah,
So
of course.
it's an industry that is more similar to defense. So you get large
Mm,
government contracts, and based on that, you develop the technology, and then this technology just trickles down to other industries. That's
yeah.
how I see it. I
Okay.
believe that all these companies, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, without government contracts, it wouldn't be that big of a thing.
It would be feasible. But essentially, you're saying is the private markets is the way to go to keep solving energy. Or I mean, it seems like for the case of a fusion reactor, like the biggest project is I believe it's pronounced ITER, ITER. That's many multinational companies investing billions across decades, actually, right? So the reactor is expected to go online, assuming they can solve all the problems with like 2040 or something. I forget. But do you think specifically these deep tech needs to be government led, or do you think private can actually find a way to first principles it and find some ways to make it more feasible, like basically like Elon Musk, right? Making it more accessible to actually commercialize it, right? Or do you think this is really needs to be still government for a long time?
Right. So yeah, well, actually, Elon Musk is a good example. You basically need
Yeah,
a very let's say aggressive entrepreneur that has a clear roadmap, but ultimately you
yeah,
do need the government money. If you look at
yeah,
Tesla and SpaceX, they're taking tons of government money.
yeah,
So ultimately, yeah, it's a government play, and I believe ITER is definitely the way. It's a multinational effort,
yeah.
and it's just a matter of making the technology work, or potentially exploring other ways to reach fusion other than the tomahawk.
Yeah. For example, ITER, I don't know. It feels like fusion is very early on in a cycle. If you look at the fossil fuel industry, specifically like oil, I mean, it's existed for 167 years. Assuming you're looking at the first commercial use was kerosene, right? Kerosene was the real reason why it took off, and then the first crude oil struck in Pennsylvania in 1859 for Seneca Oil Company, right? Edward Drake. So you had supply of the fuel, and then you had the commercialization. Then it's just a matter of kind of putting it together. But it still took 167 years to see where we are. And if you think about if you think about fusion, it's still, I don't know, roughly 80 years, if you want to say from early 40s of research to practical implementation of nuclear bombs till now. So do you think we're going to technology is allowing for a faster cycle, like we'll see in the next 30 years for real, or do we still need to wait 150 years for this to actually become real and mature?
Well, definitely technology is adopting much faster. Like
Yeah,
if you think about parents, when our parents were born, uh, there was no internet, there were no cell phones.
yeah, yeah.
There were no. I'm not sure, but there might not have been lithium-ion batteries. And
Well, let me ask you, what do you know? I mean, you're a history guy because every time we meet, you always give me some great history stories. What happened 100 years ago? Do you know?
what happened 100 years ago?
Yeah, or what was some big events that happened 100 years ago?
Well, roughly around 100 years ago, not exactly 100
Yeah,
years ago, you had
yeah,
World War One. You had
yep,
the Spanish flu. You
yep.
had the you had a large shift in geopolitical power. So
Hmm.
so if you think of it, prior to World War One, you had these guys called the Ottoman Empire, and back then they were,
Yeah,
I mean, way back
huge.
they were huge, right? But
Yeah,
now whenever you think of that, it's just Turkey, right? And Turkey's,
yeah. Small country now.
it's a relatively small country, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you have anything to share. How was Southeast Asia
Well, I don't
100
know.
years ago?
Well, it's not 100 years ago. I'm not too sure about. That'd be 1921. I mean, the national identities weren't even formed of each country, right? It was all colonies. But like, I mean, like imagining the world of how the oil complex was started, right? Back then, Russia had a famine. 5 million people died. Franklin D. Roosevelt contracted polio. Hitler became a chairman of the Nazi Party. Mao Zedong created the Chinese Communist Party, right? And these are all very, very relevant issues today. And this is just when, kerosene was just being implemented. More commercialized, I guess, before that. It had 50 years prior before that to, kerosene, and then moving on to actual burning it and using it for cars and whatnot, right? So I don't know. I think it's fair to say, like you said, within 100 years, the world changes so fast. And who knows, maybe really in 20, 30 years, because the joke in fusion is that it's always 30 years away. No matter what, every 30 years will always be 30 years away. But maybe, by the time we hit, 70, 80, 90, 100 years of doing fusion, maybe we'll have actually really solved it.
Right. And nowadays, also you can do some research using supercomputers and artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
So you can actually predict outcomes without actually building the plant. Like in the past, you would have to build a prototype and then see how it goes, like for early solar or early nuclear and such. But nowadays, you can just run a model and simulate it, and that gives you a rough estimate.
Yeah. So if you were to have kids now, would you recommend them to continue studying STEM and investing STEM? Back then, for us, it would have been, go do finance. But maybe we're at the tail end of that, right? So now technology kind of made sense. What would you do? What would you recommend for your kids?
Well, I guess there are two sides, right? If they're more STEM inclined, I would definitely suggest something related to the future. So this could be with robotics, or it could be with environmentalism. Yeah. And if they're more of a non-STEM person, I would probably ask them to get in touch with you and get acquainted with the world of communications. Like nowadays, It's all about being an influencer, being a communicator, creating a brand, and I think that's here to stay for at least for a few years.
For sure. I mean, you could even see that influence, idea into how we do commerce, online interactions, and buying. All the lines are blurring now, right? So it's a very interesting, bold new future we're looking at. But the last question for energy, then, if you were still in energy investments, or maybe for your friends, what are they looking at now? What are they investing in?
So in emerging markets, there's still space to build more gas power plants and also wind and solar. And if you're in a market that is highly developed, like if you look at the developed countries in Europe, they're actually using less energy. So given they're using less energy, it's not a matter about building new power plants, but increasing efficiency of existing assets. That's why smart cities are so important. Energy efficiency is important. So I would say if you're in a more developed market with lower energy consumption, it's all about efficiency. It's all about having a smart city, about better using existing energy. But if you're in a market such as like in Indonesia or Nigeria, it's all about thermal.
So it's a very good point. So essentially, you for this type of industry, you can't really skip steps. But what you can do is use technology to make the current existing investment even more efficient and how you consume it, right? So it's kind of like a hack in the short term until the rest of the technology can be adopted and spread where it's more renewable going forward.
That's right.
Cool. So let's move on to fintech in Asia. You joined CIMB back in 2017. Do you know what the fintech landscape was like? What was it like before you joined, and what was it like when you were working there?
Right. So before I joined, I was aware that lending and payments were huge. And once I joined, I realized that most of the players were competing to cover the payment space. So whoever controls payments controls the means of payment. So you have the Alipay, you have WePay, and you have so many players in Southeast Asia going for this. You have Grab Pay.
Yeah.
So payment was all the rage. But ultimately, if you wanna go big, you need to monetize even further. So how to monetize even further? You can do merchant deals, monetize through merchants, and also monetize through lending.
Yeah.
So you have pay later schemes, you have financing merchants based on their e-wallet transaction and so forth.
Essentially what you're saying is it's probably bundling up whatever's in the ecosystem that have like, it's kind of fragmented in terms of different technologies. And these big banks or big financial players or anyone who has probably a big user base are trying to somehow put them all together on one centralized platform for finance, or what are you thinking? Is this going to consolidate, or does it kind of remain fragmented but in the same flavor where there's many different kind of features getting put together, but maybe different for every country?
So I believe that different countries are at different stages of maturity, and
Yeah.
and also their network effects. So whoever has the most network effects will become more efficient and ultimately grow faster. So I believe that's why GrabPay has been so successful. You have them like whenever you think of food and you live in Southeast Asia, you just order food with Grab. You need a ride, you do the same, and
Yeah.
and you go to a store, you pay with QR payment using GrabPay. So in a way, they have been doing a great job. But also you have the less affluent population. So
Yeah.
for some people, it's just a matter of having a bank account. So um, you'd be surprised with how many people do not even have a bank account, right? So
Yeah.
so in a way, CIMB went for that to
Okay.
to provide bank accounts for the largest amount of people, but
Yeah.
also simplifying life. You just need to pay your bills. You do it on your phone, and you think of it 10 years ago, that was unheard of in an emerging market.
Yeah.
And then if you look at the higher end of the spectrum, like for instance, you have lots of affluent people living in Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand. They need more sophisticated asset management. So then you have
Mm.
like you have like players like Lufax and asset management. If you look at all the companies that provide trading support,
Yeah.
either traditional assets or even crypto, once
Hmm.
they IPO, they do amazing. I don't know if you
Yeah.
followed the Robinhood IPO
Yes. Yes, I
or
did.
or Binance.
Yeah. Yeah. Binance. Yeah. But Binance in the crypto world, there's a section, there's some group of people who don't trust it, I guess you could say, because the ties to back to China. But I guess that's a different story.
Well, I mean, if you follow the money, uh, most
Yeah.
money has some sort of tied to China or the US.
That's a good
That's
point.
that's
Yeah.
where those are the
Yeah.
those are like the countries that have most assets.
And talking about the unbanked population, which is probably a huge fintech opportunity, you're saying CIMB is kind of going for that opportunity. Was that related to you're launching a digital bank in Vietnam and getting a license in the Philippines, or what was that about?
Yeah, that's right. So lots of unbanked in both of those countries. So although those two countries are quite different, uh,
Yeah.
Vietnamese people have a culture of saving a lot. So
Yeah.
everybody had stashes of cash laying around in their house,
Yeah.
and whenever somebody needs to buy a house, so let's say your nephew needs to buy a house, um, the family members would probably lend the money so they could just buy the
Yeah.
house. And so part of the play was to get that money out of the homes into the bank. So
Mm.
providing competitive rates, so that people put their money in the bank. But then you have places like Philippines where savings rate are lower, it's it's, it's a culture that is closer to the US. So it's more about consumerism and living now. So for those countries, it was more of a matter of just creating the habit of saving. And if you look at Philippines, most people save. A lot of people save through insurance. They just provide payments to insurance, and the insurance is their way to investing, and not really the banks. And that's quite interesting. It's actually not that common, that insurance companies have more trust and receive more payments. And also in the Philippines, people are used to prepay for stuff. So if you want to buy an apartment, you would usually start paying in advance, way before it actually exists. You pay for 4 years, and then you get the key.
Oh, so well, that's interesting because I guess in Malaysia you only start paying once you get the key, right? And I think then, I mean, of course, you get the loan set up beforehand, the facility set up, but I think the interest payments start only ticking once you are handed the key. That's quite a very big difference. Why is that the case?
Well, part of the case is it's because the lending market is not that efficient, and also families are looking to save money. So if you pay ahead, usually you get a bit better deal. Okay. So it's just a different approach. Yeah, I mean, most people you would know, they would just go for a mortgage and buy a house. But like I mentioned, in the Philippines, you would just pay in advance, and then you would get a house. I mean, that's one of the more widespread mechanisms. And like I mentioned, in Vietnam, it would be pretty common for your relatives to lend you the money, or if you get a mortgage, you would try to just pay it out quickly in 2 or 3 years, if possible, to avoid a very high interest rates.
I mean, it feels very similar to the Chinese mentality, from what I understand anecdotally. This taste of holding debt, trying to pay up cash as much as as possible, so you don't pay more money. And typically, of course, the savings rate are high enough where wealth transfers and that kind of mechanism from parents to children. So it seems similar cultures from what I understand. That being said, so with CIMB launching and all these big financial institutions that are incumbent, are they able to compete with the Grab banks and the Shopee banks of Southeast Asia, or how is this going to turn out in terms of, do they end up fighting each other and this becomes fragmented? Do they end up working together and there's becomes like an oligopoly or something? Or how do you see this playing out with slow tech? Can they innovate or they can't innovate? And do you think these kind of big unicorns are going to take everything, or are they somehow just going to end up still being fragmented like how we've always known it?
So speaking in context of emerging markets in Southeast Asia, I believe that ultimately it will be more about partnerships. So the large incumbents, they will partner ideally with the fast moving companies. So if you look at CIMB had a partnership with Alipay. So that was one of those things, So I believe that's the way, because the fintechs or the tech companies, they typically don't have the banking licenses, and also they're not willing to allocate as many assets. So it's better for the fintech to ride on existing assets from incumbents. So for instance, if you have a Ping An, or you have a Alibaba, you would probably want to allocate the bank assets.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because Shopee has their bank license in most countries. I think Grab does too. There are certain countries where I believe these two big players are struggling, which depends on the nature of your ability to sway regulators in that specific country and relationships that you have, which is one unique facet about Southeast Asia. And if they have the same user base as a bank, what's the incentive if you have your own license to actually use that infrastructure, especially if you can innovate technology? I think the banks probably are finding it harder to innovate. And I'm sure like the Alibaba CIMB deal, it took forever to roll out features that would have taken, a month or 2 months, taken like 6 months, right? Integrating the touch, the toll card to the actual wallet, this is very slow. It just seems like if you have your own license, it makes sense to compete, or is there something else blocking that?
So I also believe there's a spectrum of services. So if it's a one-time thing with a small amount of currency, you probably do it with the fintech, right? So for instance,
Yeah.
you go and buy a burger and it's $5. You wouldn't think it twice. But
Yeah.
if I tell you to allocate your life savings, your pension in a new fintech, that's very unlikely to happen. So that's where banks will remain relevant. Banks will remain relevant in like handling assets in general, savings. Like if you want to have a large stash, you probably put it in a bank. You will not you will not save, let's say, $500,000 of your money in Grab. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Is that actual regulation or brand or both?
No, yeah, it's probably both. It's probably both.
Yeah.
But my point being that even if the technology companies are fast moving and highly efficient, it will take them a while to provide the whole list of services that banks do.
Yeah. And so knowing what you know of being an insider in this space, do you think that, for example, Grab after their pipe deal and, Shopee with the monster that Garena has, and also I guess Shopee is becoming profitable in itself. They have very good cash cows. So Grab has 10 billion after the SPAC deal. Is that enough capital to build out a financial institution to be competitive with the incumbent and to work with them? Or do you think that this is not enough money to be successful in the finance space? And what do you think?
I think that they will need to leverage somehow.
Yeah.
So they would definitely have to take deposits and have all the risk management that traditional financial institutions have. Given that oftentimes they're not as rigorous. You have the Basel Accords, and you have the capital adequacy and so forth.
Yeah.
So I believe that will take some time.
So do you think? I mean, and this is still early days. This is still assuming these kind of players, Grab, Shopee, start working with local infrastructure and banks. This is not stopping other big players from like China or other parts of the region to come in, right? So it seems like it could get very competitive going forward. Do you believe this to be the case that somehow more Chinese money will come down or other interests from abroad will come in the space as well?
Yeah. So as the space becomes more attractive and the middle class in these countries grow, there would be definitely space. I believe that initially competitors will just slug it out, but ultimately there will be a few winners, and those that require some sort of partnership to survive will do so. If you're backed by Tencent or Alibaba, your chances of survival are much higher. And they also and they also need you. They need you for your license, or they need you for your market knowledge or for your assets. So
I think that's what everyone said with Lazada maybe a few years back, right?
Right. But it's definitely exciting times, very exciting times.
Yeah. With that in mind, for the last question of this topic, if you're investing or building in a space specifically for fintech, what would you be building now?
So I would be focusing on. I would try to plug in to one of these large ecosystems. So, for instance, you could focus on lending for e-commerce merchants. That might be an interesting space, or another interesting space might be to enable offline businesses. So you just go walk around with your with your Amazon wallet, and you just purchase in a little store in some village. So just connecting the offline with online.
Great. So let's talk about TerapyGo, where you currently co-founded this company. What's the elevator pitch for TerapyGo?
Right. So TerapyGo, we want to democratize mental health for people of color, focusing on Hispanics first. We're focusing on Latin America and North America at the time, but that doesn't take away that we have some clients even in Japan.
Oh wow! Okay.
We're doing this with direct to customer, but we also have partnerships with corporates to provide them wellness programs. And another feature we're working on is to make it a SaaS enabled marketplace. So our dream is that most therapists, they have a powerful tool to provide a better service to their existing and future customers. And out of those, we're able to source the best talent for those who need a special standard. So in order to provide services to corporates and also affluent audiences.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the way that this model has been deployed to great success in the U.S. and I think many countries followed was corporates being the main kind of way to grow the company. With that in mind, it seems like you have some similar aspects to this. What exactly is the biggest pain point this model is solving for? Like, what value are you creating that was missing before, or that you're kind of innovating now?
Right. So the value for the corporate, it's to have a productive, engaged, staff. Given that,
Okay.
like in recent times, turnover is so high. Like when if a few decades ago you would just join a company and you would probably work at least 10 years in a company, and even if you look at societies such as Japan, sometimes people work just their whole careers in one company, right? So now turnover is so high, and people are more worried about their careers than their companies. So we believe that we can increase employee engagement, lower turnover, and increase productivity. So that's for the corporate. If you focus on the actual individual, it's about having the right mindset, being for people to fulfill their potential. If you're a person that is suffering from depression, it's very difficult for you to reach your full potential. Like it's a matter about being productive and being in the right mindset. What's the difference between somebody, let's say somebody who grew up in Denmark or Netherlands and somebody that grew up in the Philippines? It's about opportunity. It's about mindset, access to personal growth. So traditionally in the US, these services have been provided typically to white Americans. But if you look at minorities, so African Americans, Hispanics, typically they have not access as much to mental health services, and we believe that by providing services to these populations, we can level the playing field.
It's a very interesting point, especially vis-a-vis the minorities, and I never really thought about it. And I think probably one of the biggest criticisms you probably hear from, I don't know, investors or critics is there's got to be a cultural barrier that you have to overcome. Like these cultures of Latino cultures or even Asian cultures, there's a stigma, of needing to see professional help. People automatically box you in as, weak or, it's not normal, right? Do you engage these days, or that's not so much of a problem now?
It's definitely a problem. So if just imagine yourself having a chat with your tiger mom. Hey mom, I'm depressed.
Yeah.
She'll probably be like, I didn't raise any weakling. or if you're a Latino dude talking to your dad, hey dad, I'm depressed. He'd be like, man up, you know.
Yeah.
So so yeah, it's definitely an issue. There's a stigma, but that's what makes it interesting. Given these segments that are underserved,
Yeah.
we believe that the way to tackle it is to make it cool and make it engaging. Like
Mm.
it's like J Lo was having marital problems. So
Yeah.
I mean, if you're having marital problems, it's cool.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or Sofia Vergara,
Yeah.
she was depressed when she was a teenager. Um, and look at her now. It's like, oh, it's pretty cool to
Okay.
be a
Yeah.
depressed teenager now. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's about breaking the stigma, and
Yeah.
I think with lots of high profile people, showing their vulnerability. So you have Michael Phelps, you have Simone Biles, and you have a
Yeah.
whole bunch of other high profile figures. You have Demi Lovato, you have Britney Spears. So I believe people are understanding that it's perfectly normal. Like not everybody's at their 100% all the time, and it's
Yeah.
it's it's okay to get out. I mean, if my back is sore, I would go get a massage, and I wouldn't say
Yeah.
I'm weak.
You're weak.
It's
Yeah. Yeah.
just
Yeah.
straightforward. Or
Yeah.
if my knee hurts, I'll probably go see the doctor. It's just
Yeah.
about quality of life and reaching your potential as a human being.
In a sense, it's almost to what you speak to. It's signaling for a good cause and through influence, right? So, and it probably makes sense for your marketing strategy to use people of influence to kind of change the perception and behaviors to accept it. And I guess a tricky part though is for the consumer side. How would you measure performance of you doing a good job on the B2B side, on the client side of big companies? You probably would look to retention and employee surveys, but how could you do this for the customer side that's direct to consumer?
Right. So for direct to consumer, it's a matter of using data. So we
Yeah,
provide polls that provide satisfaction comments. So we question
like NPS.
our basically NPS, and we want to make
Yeah,
sure that all therapists are of quality and not only technically proficient, but also that they provide empathy
yeah,
and they provide an environment of trust and I guess of love in a way, so that
yeah.
people that are vulnerable can grow.
Mm.
We ensure that we touch point even after their therapy is over, just to make sure everything's all right. We provide content so that they are always engaged. Mailing. We also have some podcasts.
Mm.
With valuable information. So it's all about building community, I believe. Uh,
Okay.
so once this community grows and people notice that more people are in better shape, we believe that there will be a multiplier effect. And like you said, right?
Yeah,
If we focus on minorities, the way to do this is different. Because if you
yeah,
think of it, uh, several minority groups, they're not as individualistic. It's
yeah,
not. Most people in the U.S. soon will be people of color.
yeah. I think that's a fascinating point. If you really think about health holistically, this is a tiny slice of it, and if you can really own this niche, it lends to huge value creation across all aspects of mental health and well-being. I mean, we know, like, for example, the calm.coms and the headspaces are huge in itself. You see them branching off into other kind of content and other kind of aspects of, wellness. It seems that, if you can get this kind of, and how does it work? So you have like a marketplace. So you have curated psychologists, psychiatrists on one side, and you match them to people looking for a session. Is that the extent of the product as of now, or do you actually build actual courses and the corporates have the whole program built out, or what does it look like?
So as of now, it's the matching. We have curated therapists,
Okay.
and we match them with the client. In this case, it could be an employee from a corporate, or it could be just somebody that drops by. But we want to work towards also providing courses and also focusing on a holistic approach. So I mean, if you're if you're depressed, there might be external factors. You might be binge eating, you might be binge drinking, or you might have a sedentary lifestyle. So all of these points are related. So we want to approach it holistically. It's not about just giving advice and just providing the traditional approach. Like, tell me a little bit more about your relationship with your father. It's more about understanding your 360. Like, who are you as a human being? Who are important to you? What do you do? And like you'd be surprised with the causes of different problems. Like for instance, obesity is not a problem associated with just eating. It's a problem associated with also wealth. If you're not wealthy enough, you probably cannot be picky about what you eat, and I guess you eat more fast food. But then also, if you're not wealthy, the life is not so rosy. You have different challenges in your life, and you want to get ahead. And oftentimes these problems are carried on from one generation to the next. So for instance, if you grow up without a father, and then once you are a father, what's your role as a father, and so forth. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think. Well, I'm a pretty big avid consumer of apps, subscription apps specifically in the space. I'm a paid user for many things, from MyFitnessPal. I tried to Lose It. I'm currently trying out Noom. I've tried out a lot of other things that I paid for. And what's very interesting is that I feel that all of these never satisfy fully everything you needed. And the way this kind of industry converges is this: you kind of need to put in coaching, therapy, wellness all together with actual physical touch points as like you would have a regular coach. So if you're doing sports or something, you have really high interactions. You could do it remotely with technology now, but you kind of need that accountability tied in with the learning like you see from Noom, tied with the tracking that you see from MyFitnessPal. And it kind of seems interesting that, I kind of don't like to say this, but it seems like a perfect blitzskill opportunity where you just raise a ton of money, build a beachhead of big users, but then you try to wrap it up into kind of one ecosystem, kind of like a super app for health, which, I mean, but I mean, I think from the perspective of solving value in this space with technology, me being a user, I think that's how I would see it. Do you think that kind of makes sense or no?
Yeah, definitely. So if you look at large insurance providers, they all launch their lifestyle apps. So you have AIA, you have Allianz, you have Zurich. They launched their lifestyle apps, and it's all about having a healthy life. Like if you eat healthily, or if you exercise, or if you follow meditation and sleep, like you can even get lower premiums from insurance. So it's a win-win.
Man,
if you have
do you want to give your
healthy
information to the insurance?
Yeah, well, that's the deal, But what's your alternative? Do you want to give your information to one of the big techs also? I mean, I recently
we
read
already
that.
do, right?
Yeah, we already do, and more so every year, big tech is using more of our information, so that whatever you have in your cloud is being used by big tech. So I guess it's inevitable unless you buy one of those old Nokia phones.
Yeah. Last question about TerapyGo before we move to the last section. How do you think about sizing the market? It almost seems it's a combination of old world market comparables, but it's almost a new way of solving it with new technologies. So how do you go about thinking, my current addressable market versus the total market that I could eventually get to?
Right. So definitely the starting point is to focus on the addressable market and I guess the old school way of doing it. How many
Yeah, which is
people
my minorities
are
for you, right?
yeah. So how many people need the service? How many people, what's a typical intervention? So
Yeah,
typically, between 6 to 10 sessions would have a significant impact on most people. If you have
yeah,
a severe issue, like for instance, if you're undergoing chemotherapy or you have a severe depression or self-esteem issues, it might go longer. And if you
yeah,
have like you had a small mishap with your partner, then
yeah,
it might be less.
yeah,
So that's something we do. But if you focus on the extended market, so for insurance companies, there's a lot of space uh, by providing them information on on their patients, on how they're behaving, whether they're having healthy lifestyles, whether they have the right mindset and they're thriving. There's a lot of
yeah,
value in that information. There's a lot of value in educating, providing advice to people, courses, content, ebooks. So I it's like
yeah,
you said, right? I think it's an evolving market. Um, it's kind of like fintechs. Going back a step, like what's a
yeah,
successful fintech? Is it just payments? Then
yeah. Okay.
you have companies such as Ping An that create an amazing ecosystem. Ping An Insurance.
Yeah,
Um, so I think ultimately that's the road. You would probably have some large tech plugging in a whole bunch of different providers, and
hmm,
yeah, I think that's where it's going at. So ultimately, the big names will enter the market, or expand their presence in the market. You have the Amazons, Facebooks, the Googles, the Alibabas, the Ping Ans.
yeah. Great. Okay, so for the last section, what are the biggest differences between LATAM and Asia that now that you've been working for more than a year in LATAM and US and Asia, what are the big differences between the two East versus West kind of worlds?
Right. So I mean, there are lots of similarities and lots of differences. I would say that the similarities are on the side of how society is structured. You have a small upper class, a fast growing middle class, and you have a large part of the population that will remain relatively poor, at least for global standards. So those are some similarities. Of course, there are some just room for improvement for different um, services, education, healthcare. So there's lots of potential there for growth.
Mm,
Some of the big differences have to do with the uh, long-term vision. So typically in Asia, everything has a very long-term approach.
yeah,
For instance, if you look at how China plans its Silk Road and its long-term policy,
yeah,
that road is being paved to last 100 years. But
hmm,
if you look at Latam, it depends on the government that is in place. So every 4 to 5 years, most likely you have a completely different government with a completely different party.
mm,
So you need to make the best out of that period because you don't know
mm.
what's going to happen with the next government. So that's a
So it's very
very
short
big
term.
difference. Yeah. So for instance, if you look at Singapore has only had one party ruling ever since it became
Yeah.
independent. And
Yes.
if you look at Malaysia, that was the case until recently. But to some extent, it was more of a family feud. Like actually both sides were originally the same party, right? So in a way, in a way, the North Star is there, and there's a long-term approach.
True.
And that's why Southeast Asian countries, like even if you have a bad year, that next year is going to be okay. With Latam, if you get a president that has policies that are not market friendly, then you might have some drastic change, of course, and this has been the case for instance, Argentina. It has been the case for Bolivia. Lately, it appears to be the case for Peru, and so forth, right? I think that's a big difference.
I mean, as an entrepreneur, I was just going to say, I mean, as an entrepreneur, like that must be very hard for you to create long-term value. How do you go about thinking about it, executing it, and also telling the story to investors or your customers?
Yes, it's definitely a challenge, but that's why it's important to have a regional play. So if you look at a few of the unicorns in Latam, you have Rappi. Rappi is basically it's kind of like a Grab without the ride hailing, and and then you have some of those unicorns that are in segments that are just too profitable. So, for instance, you have Nubank in Brazil. They're basically in the market that is controlled by 3 large banks, and they provide somewhat better customer service. So that's how they have been thriving. But a large part of it has to do with how the market is set up. So interest rates in Brazil are just so high. They can reach 200% per year. If you look at a country like Cambodia or Laos, they would not allow that. They would cap interest rates. I believe that most of Southeast Asian countries cap the interest rates at around 25%. So yeah, that's part of the reason. So basically, focus on a very inefficient segment of the market, or have an international play, and build on that narrative. So Latam has a lot of opportunity. I would say it's one of the sexiest markets for venture capital, given that it's somewhat behind in different industries.
Yeah. I guess, and it's very interesting. We kind of see regional players in Southeast Asia, like Shopee, now have entered Latin America. So we see even further, border crossing, and ideas going to be shared even further. So I hope that you find, a huge success with TerapyGo, and we can see you back in Asia soon.
No, actually, I've been talking to different people, and some people ask me, so when are you opening in Asia, setup, or actually those services would be interesting here, So I think once our SaaS marketplace is in place and it's more developed, it would be easier to roll out new countries. So
for sure.
So I see it in the future. As we mentioned, right? Patients in general have not been that open to mental health services, but if you see it more as overall holistic wellness, I think people will definitely embrace it. If you tell a Chinese person, mental health will make you 20% richer, they'll be like, I'm game.
Yeah, that's true. That's a very good way to market it. I mean, there are health players doing something similar to what you're doing, but my personal take is that it's more of this, try to get rich quick scheme, because funding was really big in the space in the US, and I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know the players that well, but it's just my take. But my feeling is, it's more of monetary incentives that they're looking for versus actual holistic value creation of driving better society forward and this kind of thing. So I look forward to hopefully seeing you build your big moat in Latin America and expand globally one day.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a great call. So I'll keep you posted.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, anything we want to plug for TerapyGo or anything you're doing or any final comments?
Just if you're a savvy investor and want to focus on the Hispanic market in the US and Latin America, you can reach me at walter@terapygo.com.
Perfect. And if you're interested in angels, I know a bunch of them who would love to get an allocation if they're bullish on the market. So let me know.
Great. Let's take this offline. Right. Cheers.
Thanks, Walter. Good call. Hey, listeners. Thank you for listening to Walter's episode. If you enjoyed the content or learned something new, please share it with your friends or family who could benefit and give us a review on your podcasting platform of choice. So what did we learn today? Innovation in energy markets seem impossibly hard, just like any deep tech problem. However, there are glimmers of hope. We definitely do need more Elon Musks of the world, but it's never straightforward as you can never fully disrupt old technology specifically for energy right away due to continuous growth of markets, and along with tricky capital formation barriers. If you did like the energy section, we will be talking to an energy venture capitalist in the near future as well. That being said, with the advent of information technology, mobile adoption, and compute power, I'm definitely more bullish on this space than before. In terms of fintech in Southeast Asia, it seems we're just at the tip of the iceberg of value to be created in Southeast Asia. So it stands for anyone to benefit, whether they are investing or building in the space. We recorded this episode a few months back, and we already saw an explosion of massively funded companies in the spaces Walter talked about. It seems his prediction was spot on for what he should be building if he was in fintech. Lastly, there seems to be a convergence of health, insurance, fintech, wellness, mentally and physically, with plenty of room to grow. It's truly an exciting time to be an entrepreneur. See you guys back here for next week's episode. EOA out.